Let's make this metrics discussion exciting and exciting.
I know this is going to be hard.
You've got this.
Yeah, we got this. One of the things I'd like to kick off here is really, kind of like, how do you go about? We've talked about defining diversity. We've talked about creating the pipeline, but now let's focus on the goals. How do we set them, and what do we start with first when it comes to identifying what we need to change internally? What are the internal metrics? What are the metrics that we want to target? So how do we go about starting that discussion around the metrics and goals?
Chris, I think the first thing we have to do, and I know that the diversity discussion has been really hot and heavy, for the entire year. And so I feel like, here we go again. We're still talking about this, but the first step is actually making a decision that you want to be a diverse organization with a lot of different perspectives and people with different thought processes. And different backgrounds as well. And so that decision needs to be made from the top down. At that point, I think we had a discussion yesterday. I think it's a good idea. One thing that people often forget is your turnover. That's a metric, and that's a metric that few people pay attention to beyond what the cost of turnover is. I think people need to start looking at turnover. We have the information already. We need to start looking over where the turnover is coming from and who the turnover is impacting the most. If there's one population versus another, we need to start looking at that. And I think we also need to start looking at our employee populations. A lot of people say, oh, I have to hire more Black and brown people, and that's where they kind of leave it. And that's a part of it. But I think we also have to start looking at how many women do we have? How many veterans do we have in the organization? How many Black and brown people we have in the organization? How many other nationalities? What do we look like as an organization, and what is the community that we serve? And some of you may have heard this. I worked for a community health organization here in Seattle several years ago, and we had clinics that served the underserved populations, but we were having trouble in a lot of our clinics because all of our nursing staff, our MAs, our doctors, they were all white. And we had clinics that were in communities that were heavy Somali communities, Pacific Islander communities. And we were having a lot of complaints, and a lot of the complaints dealt with cultural things, how people were treated when they came into the clinic, different sort of gaffes or gaps that the staff missed. And we realized that we have to start recruiting specifically. And I know it sounds like, we can't just recruit Somali people, or we just can't recruit one type of person, but we really did have to start looking at the community that we serve and what was happening between the community that we serve and the current makeup of the facility in terms of its staff. We really had to look at that, and we had to say, hey, we have language barriers here that we need for people to be able to address. We have cultural barriers here that are causing legal issues and satisfaction issues that we need to start bringing people in who are familiar with these populations of people. And so we started recruiting for languages. For example, we have so many people at this facility that speak Mandarin. We need to start recruiting for that. And that could potentially mean a white man that speaks Mandarin or a Black man that speaks Mandarin, but it likely means an Asian person that speaks Mandarin. And so we had to start recruiting for that. And it was a world of difference. And we kept those metrics. We were able to, at the drop of a hat, after about 2 years of that kind of recruiting, we were able to produce a report to say, these are how many languages that we represent the community that we serve are requiring. These are how many people that we have on staff at this facility that speak this language, that speak that language, that are from this culture. And it was a huge success, and it went a long ways towards our employee satisfaction. Our both employee satisfaction and our patient satisfaction. And so I think we have to first make a decision that we are going to support a diversity initiative versus talking about it. And that needs to be something from the top down. And then we need to look at what is the community that we serve? What is the community that we want to serve? How do we want to be represented on a national scale in terms of an organization who embraces differences amongst people? And that's where we have to start. And so, I know that, and that's where we have to start. At that point, that's where we have to start building our metrics. We don't necessarily have to say, tomorrow I want to have 50% this, I want to have 10% that, I want to have 5% that. But we need to look at our employee populations and take a real critical look at, who do we have? Where are we recruiting from? And I think that's where it starts. That's where the process starts.
Well, and one of the questions I have for you, and it's because I don't know. We went through the EOE report. We actually, our head of HR came in, and she looked at our employee population. Are all companies required to do this of a certain size to do that EOE report, or is it state by state? What's the
Chris, every company that I've been with, since I've been in HR, has done it. I've worked only for larger organizations. I'm working for an organization now of 180, and we still do it. And so I'm not sure if that's a state requirement or not, because it's such a part of the process to me. And so that's a very good question.
Yeah, because when we did it ourselves, we had never, we were rapidly growing, and we really didn't have a centralized HR leader. We had the jobs were kind of distributed, but then we hired in Kendra, and when she did it, she was shocked at our numbers, that we were far exceeding, the state averages, here in Tennessee when it came to women, Black males, Hispanic individuals. And so we were able to, really kind of see, hey, we're eating our own. We didn't know. I mean, it was a goal, but we were really eating our own dog food. And, we're over 60% female in IQ talent. Granted, our leadership team are the owners, so David, Tom, and I, we're all dudes. But our director of marketing and our previous director of HR are both women. And so we really wanted to make sure that we beefed up, we knew where we were not as diverse, and we've made a conscious effort to recruit more and not be biased in how we recruit. So we're still going out to the same, resources, but now we've added additional universities that we try to recruit from. We've extended our reach. We're doing more referrals. And so we're trying to, we know that we don't have certain demographics just aren't as represented. So we're making sure that we're getting our word out and our position descriptions out and our networking through those communities in order to make sure that we ourselves are becoming more diverse and making sure that we're being very inclusive.
And Chris, how did you realize that you all didn't have certain populations represented?
The EEO data. So Kendra had gone through and reviewed each employee and made a point of really calling out where we were exceeding, demographic, like the state average, exceeding the population. She was even looking at the percent of population, breakdowns in Davidson County. So where we live in Nashville, she was, comparing our percentages to the overall population, but then also the overall state demographics when it came to the EEOC report.
Okay. Another way that I think that, and that's good that you have that data for organizations that don't currently track that. And this is just an experience. I walked into, I was working with an organization. I walked into a leadership meeting for the first time. I was brand new, and we had a leadership sort of symposium. And I walked into the room, and it was one of those that was required for leaders, and there were over 200 manager level and up folks in the room, all the way up to the C-suite folks. And I can count on one hand the number of diverse folks sitting in the room. And I immediately thought to myself, here we go again. And so someone later on asked me, I said, I think we need to start looking at, our diversity and maybe, expanding where we recruit from and where we source from. And someone said, oh, what makes you think that? Because we were talking about a leadership position specifically. And someone said, who had been with the organization, oh, what makes you think that? And I said, look around you. And it was like a light went off in the recruiter's mind for the first time. I said, look around you. You can see, look in the room at who we have at the table. You don't need a report to tell you that. Look at the community that we serve. It is a very diverse community. And so I know it's a more simplistic approach, but um, we all know what we have in front of us, and we know, who's represented in the organization, because we see it every day. Now that we're remote, we see it on Zoom. It's in front of your face. It's not hard to know where you might have some gaps and where you could benefit as an organization to have a more diverse population of people to fill those.
Yep. Adrian, I think we got a question.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in with two things. One, a question that someone asked, but before that, we had been talking about the EEOC, and two people have pitched in with very helpful clarifications here. So I just wanted to share it with everyone else. So they wrote that the EEOC collects workforce data from employers with more than 100 employees. And they're not a requirement for employees under 100 or for companies with under 100 employees, unless they're federal contractors, and there are lower thresholds for that. So that's one thing. And then we have a question from JM. So speaking of kind of communities being served and kind of who serves them, JM asked, what happens when those roles that you would like to make more diverse to match your community do not yet have the talent in them yet? So how do you identify some easy wins to both have an employee base that matches your community, but also find the best talent?
And I think that's a really good question. And here's what I recommend. Go ahead and recruit, because that is very important, that you have the right person with the right skill set and the right job. But then look at opportunities too. Like if you're finding that you are recruiting for a position and you don't have a lot of diverse talent within those organizations, or within the applicant pools that you're getting, look at maybe, and this is a long-term sort of commitment, but look at maybe being a part of the solution by having internship programs that will grow individuals in those positions, or that will bring people that have an interest in those roles, that may be able to go on and fill those roles. If not at your organization, maybe another organization. But I've seen that too, where we have positions that we are recruiting. We're recruiting for, we want to recruit a diverse individual, but we cannot find someone with that particular specialty. It's okay. Fill the position as you need with the person with the right skill set and everything. But think of things that you might be able to do if you notice that there's a particular skill gap in a particular position. Look at some alternative areas that you may be able to source diverse candidates that may not have that particular skill set, but you might be able to grow. Look at your internal population pool to see if someone is with the organization that may be able to, a diverse person with the organization that may be able to grow into that position with the right career pathing or the right training. That's one solution that I'd say. Again, it's a more long-term fix, but it starts the ball rolling globally to bring more diversity to any given setting. And so it's certainly okay to, the number one priority is to make sure that you have the right skill set in a position, regardless of who the individual is. But again, if you're seeing those kind of gaps, see what you can do to fill those gaps with internal folks, or maybe start the ball rolling on committing to having people to come on site and train, internships, maybe other positions that will career path into that particular area.
Yeah, and that actually covers the something we were going to cover later, but we will come back to the whole internship and university side of things. But from a sourcing standpoint, if you look and say there are only 20 people in general, that have a specific skill set, in your geography, you got to look outside anyway. So when it comes to diversity, where is the diverse talent that has that skill set? And do you have a relocation budget? If they don't live in the city that you're operating, or in the environment in which you're recruiting, look outside. Where are they? Where's the diverse talent that has the skills that you're looking for? And make sure that there's a relocation budget. There's also a lot more work from home opportunity now because of the pandemic, and so you can also recruit nationwide if the role can be done remotely. So you're able to then also increase the diversity within your talent pool by just going outside of your city and allowing people to work remotely. And then again, a lot of companies don't want to create a relocation budget. So you have that, there's we've in previous discussions about diversity, it costs money to create diversity programs. It takes time, it takes effort, which translates into dollars operationally. So that's where that commitment comes from. If you're committed to diversity and increasing diversity, you may also have to also relocate people to where you are and where you want them. And so balancing, that's that balancing act. Even if you're looking for a specific skill set.
That's a great transition into, oh, go ahead, William.
Oh, I was going to say, Chris, even if organizations are too small or don't have a relocation budget, what I found is, and just to tell a quick story here, we were recruiting for, I suggested that we go back to one of the historically Black colleges back east to Spelman. We were recruiting for nurse positions. And so we had some nurses that had sent their resumes for the role. And so as we're talking about these roles, the nurse director was saying, oh my goodness, well, we don't have a relocation budget. We don't have a conversation with the individual. As it turned out, both of the nurses that wanted to relocate to Seattle had spouses. One had a fiance in the military that were already here. And so they were looking for roles. So sometimes cast the net. Even if you don't have those resources yet, cast the net and then have the conversation during the screening process. What are you looking for? Here are our resources, because people might be willing to relocate because the weather's better. They have relatives in a certain city. Aunt Fanny lives back in Atlanta, so wherever you are. So they might have different reasons for why they're wanting to relocate, and maybe a relocation budget is not as much of a priority as it is getting to the location.
Yeah, and sign-on bonuses are typically something that's there, not used a lot. The sign-on bonus can also be used to compensate someone for relocation. Mm-hmm. So even if there isn't a formal relocation budget, do a sign-on bonus, and it kind of accomplishes the same goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the net.
I was going to transition that nicely into a question that someone asked about hiring or attracting a more diverse talent pool and looking locally or nationally. They were asking for any kind of recommended advertising or sourcing tips. And before I pass it on to you, Chris and William, I just want to say that I'm going to drop links to past sessions in that answer too, so you all can see it, because we've talked about that more at length in past sessions as well that you can tune into. Okay. All right, over to you.
Well, I think one of the first places, look for organizations. There's the Grace Hopper, which is Women in Engineering. You have it's NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. So these are organizations where they have postings and they have opportunities to post. The historically Black colleges, there's women-only universities. You can post there. A lot of these universities use Handshake, where you post once and you pick the schools and regions you want to post in. You can actually select which universities, and you can prioritize certain universities over others. William, do you have anything to add?
Chris, I thought those were really, really good, and don't forget good old-fashioned referrals from your existing employee population. I know that people tend to, and it can kind of work against us sometimes, but people tend to hang around like folks. And so make sure you use that process widely, not just one segment of people, or not just at the director level or manager level, but make sure you go out to staff to maybe offer some sort of, small incentive for referrals and see what you get. And again, make sure that that's broad. It's not just you're not just going to the same folks, and you're not just going to senior level folks. You're going to staff level folks as well, and get referrals. That way, that's a good source as well.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing to do is avoid posting in echo chambers. That's the biggest thing. You want to make sure that you're posting in areas that are not going to be exclusive. So when a hiring manager says, I only want someone from a top 20 school, if you look at the breakdown of the ethnic demographics and gender demographics, you're not going to see a very diverse population. So making sure that, you can advertise all over the place, and as long as you're choosing platforms that are not exclusive, and I mean that in terms of excluding people and being inclusive, making sure that you're not artificially posting it in places where you're already limiting the number of people that will apply that are in an underrepresented group within your organization.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at where you're sourcing from, you might actually be surprised where you might see some opportunities. So I challenge you all to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a good way to also kind of segue, because it is tangentially related. Making sure that when you do actually are recruiting and you are presenting slates, making sure that you have a diverse slate of candidates. And I'm going to post a link here to a Harvard Business Review article, and it essentially says that they did a study and they found that if there's only one woman in your candidate pool, there's statistically no chance that she'll be hired. So this is it's a snapshot. It is somewhat of an older article, but the data still kind of holds up. It's a metric that you can really kind of see what you need to avoid and what you kind of need to emphasize. So making sure that there are at least 2 women on a final panel will give you a statistically higher chance of hiring a woman into your organization. So this is just one little snapshot, and I wanted to share it. William, do you have anything to add?
Chris, I think that's a really, really good. That's a really good call out, and thanks for sharing that resource. I just want to back that up. That is very true. I think the more diverse your panels are, the better chance you have of getting that diverse population of people. And sometimes I sarcastically say all of this is by design. Why we only go to the top 20 schools, why we have panels that are typically, loaded with manager level people. And so, but we really need to look at that. And when you're getting your panels together for an interview, it's perfectly okay to have people there that are actually doing the job. It might create an opportunity for people, first of all, to learn how to interview, to feel a part of the process. So as they have new employees that are onboarding, they feel more invested in that person's success, and also to lend that eye and that opinion to the hiring process to make sure that you have a well-represented population of folks. So again, don't just go to managers and leaders. Make sure you go to the people that are actually doing the job and make people a part of that process. I used to come in to interviews as the head of human resources to sort of talk about, I'm here to talk about culture a bit and talk about benefits, tell you what we're like as an organization, what your experience will be working here. But it was also to serve as that representation on the panel as well, to say, here is what I saw. And here's my opinions on it. So it's okay to have folks there too. I would not recommend having someone as a part of a panel that is just you have a person of color kind of sitting there being an observer. Make sure that everyone at the panel on the panel has a purpose on a role, but make sure that you have a well-represented panel of the type of population of people that you want your organization to look like.
Yeah, and Adrian, I'm going to talk about Desiree's comment and question up here. Any advice on how I can sell leadership on the importance of D&I? It's not something that is regularly talked about or focused on. Many in my firm believe focusing on recruiting people of color, POC talent, is not the best strategy. Now, you had mentioned previously that no, you hire for the best person, but you make sure that you're more inclusive. Do you want to expand upon kind of what you talked about previously?
Yeah, always. I always encourage you. Got to have the right person in that right role with the right skill set, regardless of what color. But there are actually studies that have been done. People can measure an organization's success when they have a multicultural population of people. It lends to an organization that has a reputation for good employee culture is one that attracts top talent. A lot of people these days, and this is something that is happening in recent years here. When people are interviewing for jobs, they're actually asking, "What is your culture like here? What is your?" They're asking questions about staff engagement. What do you do towards that? What types of programs do you have? Because that's very, very important, and that is one of the questions that people are starting to ask when they're interviewing you is what's your culture? People are choosing one employer over another based on if or not the population is if they have a diverse population, because I think when people see that, it speaks to a lot of other things too, about an organization, that people feel like they're coming into a place that's fair, that's socially conscious, that cares about the community that they work within, and that they serve. And so if we are not sort of supporting that we have a good employee culture, we will see that in our ability to be able to create good talent. And that is actually supported in so many studies that have been done. And this is how I pitch it to executives. Unfortunately, and I'll be glad when this is not even a conversation that we have to have, when this is organic. But unfortunately, sometimes you have to appeal to that top level for now. You have to appeal to that top level who don't believe in the value of diversity recruiting. You have to appeal to them where it counts in terms of money. And there is so much information out there that supports an organization is more profitable when they have a more diverse population of people and a culture that mirrors the community that they're serving.
Yeah, and this actually goes to the next question now. Someone's mentions that their HR thinks that implicit and unconscious bias training will solve everything. It's the panacea that will solve diversity and D&I recruiting. So, are there any studies? I mean, there are studies. You just mentioned one that show that diversity improves performance and creativity and innovation. But beyond the D&I training and the unconscious bias training, what are some other steps that need to be taken in order to be successful? Because that's not the be all to end all. There's more steps that have to be identified and taken in order to transform an organization's processes.
I think, Chris, it has to be, after we get that buy-in, and I think the best kind of buy-in that we can hope for from a lot of organizations is what I'm finding out is for them to say, go ahead and give it a try, or do what you want to do. And in that point, we can be creative and we can do the work that needs to be done. But I think we also need to drop it down to our recruiters. We were talking before about where are we sourcing from? What does that look like? What are our referral sources? Work with our recruiters to do things like make sure that you're sourcing from historically Black colleges, programs, or associations or groups that have large LGBT populations. There are many areas that you can go to. I worked with an organization where we actually had an agreement with the foster care system for people that were aging out of the foster care system. What next? And so, how do we capture those people for potential internships, which was a very successful program. We have an organization here in Seattle called Youth Care that specializes in housing for LGBT youth. and they have agreements with organizations here, large organizations here, that the individuals who come through youth care can come to, for example, Starbucks and work and learn at Starbucks to be able to grow up through that system. And so make sure that, again, look at where you're sourcing from and look at the opportunities. Sometimes we can have relationships with the most unlikeliest institutions that will bring us some of the best folks. And so work with your recruiters to make sure that they start that process, and also start exercises like doing blind resume reviews. I think that has been really, really successful. I had someone yesterday, I've been with my organization for a little bit over 3 months now. Someone yesterday said on the Zoom call, so, oh, all this time I didn't know you were a Black man. And so I thought, ooh, oh, I guess the process worked. Do blind resume reviews. I think a lot of people tend to make decisions. I've seen hiring managers look at an area that someone is moving from and says, "Oh no, the police is always down there," and they make all sorts of. That's that unconscious bias. They make all sorts of decisions. Oh, she's not going to be able to get here in time. She lives too far away. Stuff like that. And I found that when you remove indicators of the addresses, even names and stuff, the review process is much more bountiful and can net a lot more diverse candidates when you remove those sort of things that people can make judgments on or unconscious that they have unconscious bias towards. And so those are two things that I think we can do.
Kimberly, by the way, just to jump in quickly, had dropped into the chat that her organization has, to the panelists, she dropped in that her organization has been blinding resumes before submitting to hiring managers by only showing degrees and not universities attended. And Kimberly, I'm curious if you want to drop it into the chat to everyone what that experience has been like and how it's gone for you too.
Well, there's also a story that, sometimes you have the best of intentions. And so you kind of have to keep learning and looking at the metrics. So even when you blind the resumes, still look at the outcomes. There's a gentleman, Ashu, who's the founder of Eightfold. And he tells the story of a symphony that realized that they weren't very diverse and they decided to do blind auditions. And those blind auditions still did not result in, in improving the diversity. And it turns out that women walking in high heels, the sound of the high heels on the stage was also potentially impacting the ability to truly, make them a blind audition. And so they had everyone take their shoes off. And all of a sudden, magically, diversity was improved. So even if you start somewhere, look at the results, test it out. And if there's when you blind a resume, if you like somebody said, remove the university, that might end up also being. So keep finding those steps, keep working with what you're doing, looking at the data, collecting the data, looking at the data, and comparing it against the goals that you have or that have been set. It'll even help you figure out, what else you may need to blind within a resume or within the process.
And Chris, another thing I think you mentioned when you said about degrees, look at maybe do a job description review. I had an experience a while back where we were doing updating the job descriptions. And so I go back to the hiring manager and I said, do we still need a PhD for this position? And she said, let me see that. We don't need a PhD for that. Oh, I take that off. And consistently, I actually got that when we would go back to the hiring manager and say, now, do we need a master's for this? They would look at it and say, oh, no, take that off. We don't need that anymore. And so if we have that, that's what we try to recruit for. And again, we're segmenting, we're really reducing our candidate pool if we have these requirements for PhDs, for masters, for educational certifications and stuff that we really don't need for the position. And that's another exercise that you can start in the new year to look at your resumes and make sure that you have the right qualifications out there.
Yeah, and what's interesting, William, is that you can, as you're attempting to work with leadership on setting goals and identifying issues from the bottom, recruiters and HR, we can be doing things without an official statement. There are things that we can be doing, like having conversations with the hiring managers, and then the hope is that we meet in the middle somewhere. you know, in affecting change.
And I think for now, again, I'll be so glad when this conversation, I feel a little bit, I'll be honest, I sometimes feel someone had said, one of the participants had said that their organization is not quite there yet in terms of, in terms of diversity. And I feel like we have discussed this topic so much. I feel sometimes like, are we shoving this down people's throats? And I almost want to back off, but then we can't. This is the way that the world is going. And again, it's not to say that we're taking jobs or opportunities from anyone else. We're casting a wider net to increase our candidate pools, and to make sure that we're not missing something out there. And I think right now, we have a lot of that missed opportunities that we can be taken advantage of. And so don't stop the fight in terms of working with your leadership teams to make them to see the value. The people on this call right now know better. And here's what I firmly believe, and I tell recruiters this all the time too. You know more about this recruiting process than anyone in the C-suite. And I firmly believe that. And so you have to be confident in that, and you have to be able to go in and sort of put what you were, this is what you were hired to do for the organization. So why wouldn't you be trusted when you take in an idea to bring in top talent to the organization? So don't stop, because you know more about this process than anyone else in your organization, including the hiring managers, including any executive.
And because we're doing the research, we're looking at the data. When we do a search, I'm gonna make sure I don't want to break confidentiality with the client, but we're working with a company trying to find a VP level executive for a role. And in doing the research and looking at the talent pool, we noticed that it was maybe 10 to 15% were female at the VP level. And for the most part, this would be a lateral move for just about everyone I identified. The response rate for male candidates was incredibly high. It was 0 from the female candidates. And I had a conversation with the hiring manager who specifically said, why am I not seeing any women? And I said, well, they've been unresponsive. I've left my messages. However, we're going to have a bigger candidate pool when we go to look at their senior directors. And actually that's where the response rates are 50-50, male to female. So I was able to convince the hiring manager to allow me to look one level below from VP to senior director. And all of a sudden I've got a more diverse talent pool. I've got a more energized talent pool. And it's now a step up. It's an opportunity for us to now screen for high potential, regardless of level. So now I can really look for the right person for the role in a bigger talent pool that's more energized and ready to take that next step in their career. So it totally improved everything.
Yeah, great call out, Chris.
Kimberly just said, yeah, it's because they're hungry. Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Exactly. I love these panelists, or the attendees today are awesome.
I agree. Thank you all for your chats and your questions.
Yeah. So Adrian, we have one last question that's still in the Q&A queue.
Yep. So JM has another question. Thank you. Here she said, oftentimes you can present a diverse slate of candidates. You can build a story around those candidates. And then leadership kind of goes for the person they're most comfortable with, or maybe that they know, for example, the leader plays golf with them and or something like that. What tools can you use to change that mindset when all candidates are equally qualified?
Mm-hmm. I I hear that when you first started reading the question, it reminded me of a story. Sometimes, and here's what I have done in the past. I will actually go when I see, and sometimes it's so blaringly obvious that we have someone who is not qualified for this position that's being passed on because their father played golf with the other person. Look at the resume. And it reminds me of a story where we had a very important finance position open. We had interviewed about 11 different people for this position. All were really, really qualified. Two were highly, highly qualified. The individual that they decided to go with, or that they were deciding to go with, was an individual that had came in who had a background in construction, like as a builder. And so I took that. That was who the hiring manager wanted because it was a referral from an executive that was in the C-suite. So I took the resume and I said, "Can you tell me what about this resume stands out in terms of this position?" He can learn. He's energetic. He can learn this position. It'll be fine. We'll teach him this. We'll teach him that. We'll precept him. Okay, which is a huge money drain, especially when we're talking about someone who is not up to speed at all, and it's going to take about a year. And so I fought it. I fought it. I fought it. The executive won. I don't think that individual made it through two pay cycles before they went back to construction. It was such a horrible that two couple of 4 weeks was really, really bad. And so the next time this came up and the same thing, the same story started to unfold, I went back and did the same process. And they said, okay, we'll listen to you this time. So I think the lesson in that is speak up. I know it's hard for us to do sometimes because we feel like, it's not going to change anything, but speak up, be a thorn in everyone's side. Again, you have the expertise and you sort of know how this is going to play out. Hiring someone in a role that is not qualified for the role is not good for the individual, it's not good for morale, and it is not good for the bottom line of the organization if it's going to take a year for someone to be able to learn the role. And so make sure you speak up and again bring your expertise to the situation and don't be afraid to challenge the decisions like that. I know that we sometimes get into the thing of the hiring manager knows who they want or they know, but we are working in conjunction. It's a partnership that we have with our hiring managers, and make sure that your voice is heard in that process too. So when you see this happening, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to take it on and say, "I need a little bit more information. This just doesn't align, and I need you to know what the consequences could potentially be." You might not always have a win, but I guarantee you will have some wins, and but you have to make sure that you speak up about that and don't be silent.
Yeah, and it's you do it through polite persistence.
Mhm.
That's the goal. I mean, that's how you keep. It may be two steps forward, one step back when it comes to fixing process and driving change and being effective in that change. One of the things as a recruiter, I've had this issue where, I'm recruiting on a spec, a position description that is spelled out, very well written, clearly communicated what the hiring manager wants. And then when push comes to shove, I'm going out there, I'm sourcing candidates, I'm getting people in that hit everything, that are perfect. But then the hiring manager says, "Well, why didn't you hire, what about this person? What about this person?" In some cases, they've expanded the talent pool by saying, "Well, hey, what about this person?" I was like, "Well, that person doesn't have a degree in X, and you wanted a degree in X, and now that all of a sudden that's removed. I've now got a bigger pool." But then on the other side, you get the hiring managers that they completely throw the spec out and are ready to hire someone who is not even close to the job description, but it's somebody that they want to give the opportunity to. What you have to do there is say, "Okay, well, here are the challenges. Here's what you wrote. Do you want to completely rescope the position?" There are ways to say it without saying you're being a jerk about it. You can actually be polite, ask a lot of leading questions that ultimately, hopefully, get them to realize they're creating a whole new role. And that's when you can say, "Well, okay, well, do you want to just create a role for that person rather than transforming this role, this very well-defined role, and just hiring somebody that has never done it before?" You can actually say, "Well, hey, we can just create another role and they can do that job, But this one here, it's completely different. They are not qualified to do this. We're going to have to completely rescope it. And pointing that out, that's a lot of work to rescope a role. It's a little bit easier sometimes to just open up a role for that person and be able to find the right person for the role that was already open.
To jump in there too, Desiree, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, also weighed in the chat and said that their organization is working on developing a post-interview evaluation form that the interview panel would have to complete. So for each candidate, they'd have to kind of fill in the measuring competencies, which probably forces them to think through their qualifications too.
Mm-hmm. I think that's
Thanks
great.
for sharing that, Desiree.
And just a bit of a plug here, because I'm also a CoMeet customer. CoMeet has that ability to create in the interview process, the questions and topics that everyone has to do in the interview feedback. So if you've got tools that allow you to collect feedback, it's so easy to hold people accountable for good and bad process, and making sure that we're not being exclusive when it comes to recruiting.
It's so true. Thanks, Chris.
I'm not paid.
Yeah.
I'm not
Checks in the
paid.
mail.
All right, we got another question from David.
Yes, David asked, so what is a good interviewee to interview question to help inform yourself on an organization's state of cultural belonging or where they are on their journey? So if I'm understanding that correctly, what are good questions for the candidate to ask the interviewers to understand where they are on their D&I journey? Is that correct, David? If you can just weigh in. Okay, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll give it from my perspective, and I'll let William chime in. Glassdoor is a good place to check. For better or for worse, it can be a thorn in a lot of people's side, because more people might take the opportunity to provide negative feedback than positive feedback. So you kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt. But looking at Glassdoor, looking at the positive and negative reviews can give you a good idea of what a culture is like. A lot of companies have culture web pages. You can go to that section. YouTube has videos on that reflect that could reflect company culture. It could be executive speaking, presenting at a conference, and you get a feel for what the executive leadership's like. So those are some of the examples I've used to gauge culture.
And I would say ask about affinity groups that companies have. If they give you a sort of a portfolio of what affinity groups they have, you can just about tell sort of where their commitment to certain social justice issues lie, to where their commitment to a better environment lies, and that's a very reasonable question to ask, because I think for the interviewer it also shows that you want to commit to the organization on a level that goes beyond just coming in and working your 12-hour shift. And so that's a really good question, and it's one that I've seen people ask. What types of affinity groups do you have that I would be able to join or participate in?
Yeah, I'm gonna close my doors in case you can hear my dog.
Your dog wants to weigh in on the Zoomside chat. They have thoughts. Were you going to weigh in? I was going to move on to another question, Chris, or we're good?
Oh, ready. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Kimberly had asked to kind of leapfrog on the question before last when we were talking about leadership, kind of going with the hires that they're most comfortable or familiar with. Kimberly kind of wants to ask the same about hiring managers. So how do you get hiring managers on board with not necessarily giving preferential treatment to referrals and looking at all candidates kind of on the same playing field?
I think it goes back to that relationship, because some hiring managers, I've seen hiring managers where they get referrals from the top down. They're not crazy about the referrals that they get, but they feel somehow compelled to to make those types of hires or honor those referrals that they get. And I think a good partnership between the hiring manager and a talent acquisition person, again with that expertise, that can help them talk through or even give them language to use about, if we make this choice, we're going to have to reformat this position, or here are some consequences of if we hire this individual in this role. Here's where there could potentially be some landmines that we're stepping on. It helps them to empower them to say no, or empower them to be a part of the final decision, especially if they're getting an external referral. I think that relationship between the hiring manager and the talent acquisition person, sort of as a team, can support a conversation. When it's the hiring manager, I think it just goes back to that talent acquisition person, that recruiter, being able to say, let's slow down. Here is what the pitfalls are. All too often, I don't see that conversation taking place until the recruiter is upset, or it's taken place after the decision has been made. And I think we have to empower our TA folks to have that conversation in the moment. And I guarantee you will be successful more often than you're not.
And actually, this goes back to William, something you said earlier in this conversation about retention. If you notice an organization is losing more people and it has more attrition than in other organizations, exit interviews, collect the interviews, collect the questions and the topics that led to somebody leaving. And a lot of times it'll be the same issues that you're experiencing with a hiring manager could be reason why that you're constantly having to fill roles in their organization. So collecting the feedback as people are leaving will allow you to collect the data that you can learn from and leverage to fix things that are broken.
Mm-hmm. It's very true. And work with your HR team, because it may be that you have if you have turnover in a certain area, and it's coming from a specific hiring manager or a specific unit, there might be an opportunity to lean in with HR to do some additional training or to do some leadership development types of exercises with those leaders. And so make sure you engage your HR partner too.
I think we might have time for one more question if anyone wants to drop one into the Q&A tool. We've run through all of your questions thus far, but we have 4 minutes remaining, so time for one more question if anyone wants to drop it in.
And while we're waiting on those questions, William, is there anything that you want to add? Oh, hey, somebody asked a question in the chat. ERGs. I don't know what that is.
I think aren't ERGs employee resource groups, so they can you can form different coalitions within an organization based on identifying.
William referred to those as affinity groups.
Oh, okay.
William referred to those as affinity groups.
Yeah, the terms are used interchangeably, but that's what it's essentially the same thing. And so I'm sorry, I didn't see the question when it popped up.
Thoughts on ERGs? So I think that you had already kind of talked about it, but you had referred to them as affinity groups.
Mm-hmm. And here's another thing. I think when the Black Lives Matter movement, when was sort of exploded during this past year, a lot of organizations added a lot of diversity, sort of affinity or ERG groups. A lot didn't. And so I think that speaks to, again, sort of that commitment to where, so you will add a resource group to, separate the compost from the other trash, but we don't have a resource group to support, a particular employee population. I think that speaks to an organization's commitment too. But again, it's okay to ask about those. And once in an organization or as a TA person, or even an HR person, I think that if you have observed or received feedback that there is a need for a particular group, it's certainly okay for you to go through the channels to see if it's possible to get one started at a particular organization. Oftentimes they require a charter and that type of thing. There's a process, but there's always individuals to sort of fill those to fill the seats at those types of tables And so don't be shy. Again, don't be shy about taking that to the next level. If there's one that you recognize from your work that the organization might benefit from, don't be shy about escalating that.
Mm-hmm.
And then one last question in our last 2 minutes from Lindsay. Great question, Lindsay. How do you collect data on diversity recruiting without relying on your own biases about someone's identity, gender, race, etc.?
Chris, did you want to start that one?
Well, I'll first off, diversity is going to be something different across each company and even within various functional and organizational groups within a company. So one of the first things you need to do is define what diversity means to that client, to that functional group. And then from there, you got to work with the hiring manager and leadership to really kind of define those goals. William, your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that at the talent, at the TA level, we know who we have coming in the door. We know what people are declaring in terms of, their ethnic backgrounds, at least, and we know who we're interviewing. Again, I would encourage the TA folks, if at any given organization, to kind of build that out and start start at a place where it's manageable, based on the number of positions that you have and that you're recruiting for. You know how many people applied for the position, you know who you screened, you know what they were, you know how many made it past the initial screening process, to start to track that data, even on a small scale if you don't currently do it, and see what you capture. It might kind of be fascinating to you and encourage you to, to do more. And so start the process small, in tracking what you can, what you have access to, and take a look at it and see what you're learning from it.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at when you look at who's successful at getting through the process. If you notice that women are constantly falling off, I mean, William, you brought up a story in a previous video about there weren't any women on the panel, the interview panel. And so women were falling out because they didn't see themselves in the company. So those are those little things that you have to look for and match them up against, like, say, if there are communicated goals from an organization, that gives you the framework of how to start collecting the data. But in the absence of that, there you do have to kind of look for the data. You have to look for issues. You have to, and you do that through collection. And yes, there are some assumptions that have to be made about someone's gender or ethnicity because you may not know. Mm-hmm. But there are things that you just start collecting this, start looking here, and you'll start to uncover things that can help an organization, fix their D&I recruiting efforts.
And Chris, I just want to leave our folks today with, I personally think recruiting is recruiting and talent acquisition is a very, very difficult thing to do. And I always say, and I say this all the time, and people laugh at me when I say it, do you have the right people in place? Is your department properly staffed? Have you guys been successful? Yeah. Thank a recruiter, because that's where it started. And so depending on how that recruiter or how that TA team does their job, it could actually mean the success or the downfall of an organization. And so don't take that lightly. It's a very important job. And if you have the right people at an organization, and you're staffed up and you're being successful, that started with this process, and that is huge. And so you have a seat at this table, for such a huge role, such a huge responsibility. You deserve to be heard, and you have a voice, because what you do is very important, and it's not something that everyone can do successfully. And so,
William, you get to drop the mic. Like that's
yeah.
Mic drop right there.
It starts with TA. It starts with talent acquisitions. It does.
Yeah.
And so I can't stress that enough. And for that, you get to come to the table and you get to say how the process flows and what's good and what's going to work. And so don't be shy about taking that power and using it in your organizations.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. This discussion has been really fantastic, from your comments, to your questions. We've really appreciated your input. We're going to email out the recording and a few of the links and whatnot that were discussed today. Expect that email on Monday. And thank you again.